The smell of pig manure and fresh mud was my life for 50 years. Never thought I'd be sitting here in my rocking chair, staring at this plastic piggy bank with a receipt taped to it. $3 million. That's what my nephew Kyle got when he sold my life's work, the farm I planned to give him when I died. But he couldn't wait that long. I remember the day I signed those papers. "Uncle Frank," he said, "I'll make you proud." His eyes were wet with what I thought were tears of gratitude. Turns out they were dollar signs. The farm my daddy left me, the land that fed 3 generations of Simpsons, gone. Sold to Big Ham Industries before my signature was even dry. What Kyle didn't know was that I had my suspicions from the start. That's why I set a trap. And when it snapped shut at my 68th birthday party in front of our entire family, well, let's just say the prodigal son wasn't welcomed back with open arms. This is the story of how I lost everything I built, and somehow ended up with something more valuable. I was born and raised in Oak Ridge County, about an hour outside of Des Moines. Simpson Family Farms wasn't just land, it was our identity. My father, Earl Simpson, built it from 20 pigs and 10 acres into one of the most respected family operations in the state. "Pigs are smarter than most people I know," Dad used to say. "They remember who feeds them, and they remember who hurts them." Growing up, my older brother Thomas was always Dad's favorite. "Thomas has the business mind," Dad would announce at Sunday dinners after church. "Frankie here's just good with the animals." I'd shrink in my chair while everyone nodded. Even at our 4-H competitions when my pigs won blue ribbons, Dad would say, "Frank got lucky with good stock." But when Thomas's investments nearly bankrupted us in '79, I was the one who worked double shifts at the processing plant to keep our farm afloat. When Thomas died of a heart attack at 45, his son Kyle was just 7. My wife Ellen and I never had children. Something about my swimmers not making it upstream, as Doc Hendrickson delicately put it. So Kyle became like a son to me. Every summer he'd come stay at the farm. I taught him everything: how to tell when a sow was ready to farrow, how to patch fencing during tornado season, how to negotiate with the Tyson buyers who always tried to lowball us. "Uncle Frank," he'd say, "someday I want a farm just like yours." Those words were sweeter than honey butter on cornbread. When Kyle graduated from Iowa State with his agriculture business degree, I surprised him with a manager position at the farm. By then, we'd expanded to 800 acres, 3 breeding facilities, and contracts with major distributors across the Midwest. We were clearing about $300,000 a year. Not tech company money, but damn good for pig farmers from Iowa. The first few years were good. Kyle modernized our operation, brought in computers for tracking breeding lines, installed those fancy automatic feeding systems. Our profits jumped by 30%. At the Oak Ridge County Fair, other farmers would slap my back and say, "Frank, that nephew of yours is going to take Simpson Farms to the next level." What I didn't know was that Kyle had been talking to Big Ham Industries since his 2nd year with us. The same corporation buying up family farms across the heartland, replacing generations of knowledge with assembly line pig production. The same outfit my father had refused to sell to back in '85, even when they offered him double what the place was worth. "A Simpson doesn't sell his birthright," Dad had said then. I lived by those words. For my 65th birthday, Kyle and his wife Meredith threw a barbecue at their new McMansion in the suburbs. All granite countertops and stainless steel, not a speck of dirt in sight. After a few too many bush lights, Kyle pulled me into his home office. "Uncle Frank, you need to start thinking about retirement," he said. "You're working too hard. What if you had a stroke out there alone with the pigs? What would Ellen do?"
That's when he proposed his grand gesture. I'd sign over the farm to him while I was still alive, avoid all those estate taxes. He'd give me and Ellen a generous stipend to enjoy our golden years. He had the papers drawn up already. "You've been like a father to me," Kyle said, his hand on my shoulder. "Let me take care of you now." I signed the papers a month later. The family farm was his. What Kyle didn't know was that the night before, I'd received a call from Bob Thornton at First National. "Frank," he'd said, "someone's been asking about the market value of your operation. Wanted to know what financing options would be available for a corporate acquisition." That's when I knew.
But I needed proof. And I needed the family to see Kyle for who he really was. My 68th birthday was approaching this past June. Ellen insisted on throwing a proper family gathering at our little house in town, the 2-bedroom ranch we'd moved to after giving Kyle the farm. "Just because we downsized doesn't mean we can't host," she said, though I could see how it hurt her to not be in our farmhouse kitchen where she'd cooked for 40 years. Kyle and Meredith offered to host instead. "Your place is kinda small, Uncle Frank," Kyle said on the phone. I could hear the condescension dripping like slow molasses. "We've got the space, and Meredith just renovated the back patio." "No," I said firmly. "Ellen wants to do it here." What I didn't tell him was that I'd been collecting evidence for months. Emails forwarded to me by Jerry at the co-op showing Kyle's negotiations with Big Ham. Bank statements showing unusual deposits. A draft sales contract left carelessly in Kyle's truck when he visited. A truck he'd bought with farm profits that should have been reinvested in our operation. Ellen spent 3 days cooking. Her famous pulled pork with Carolina vinegar sauce, honey cornbread, potato salad with bacon, and her blue ribbon apple pie. Our small house smelled like heaven. I watched her hands, now knotted with arthritis, still moving with grace as she crimped pie crusts. These were the hands that had held mine through 5 decades of marriage, through 2 miscarriages, through Dad's funeral, and Thomas's too. "Are you sure you want to do this today?" she asked, catching me staring. "It has to be in front of everyone," I replied. "The whole family needs to see." The Simpsons started arriving around noon. My sister Judith and her husband from Omaha. Cousins from my mother's side, the Petersons, who'd driven in from Missouri. Kyle's cousins from Thomas's first marriage. Even old Aunt Mabel, approaching 90 but still sharp as a tack, arrived with her signature pickled beets. Kyle and Meredith came last, pulling up in his new F-350 Limited, a $90,000 truck bought with my pig's blood and sweat. They brought their 2 kids, Taylor and Connor, both glued to their phones. Meredith carried a store-bought cake, setting it next to Ellen's homemade pies without a hint of shame. "Happy birthday, Uncle Frank," Kyle boomed, handing me a small box wrapped in glossy paper. "Just a little something to enjoy in your retirement." I smiled tightly. "Thanks, Kyle. We'll open presents after dinner." Throughout the meal, Kyle dominated the conversation. He talked about the improvements he was making to the farm, all things that would increase its value for sale, I now realized. New steel buildings, updated waste management systems, expanded breeding facilities. "Simpson Farms is entering a new era," he announced, raising his glass. "To Uncle Frank for building the foundation, and to the future." Everyone clinked glasses. Ellen squeezed my knee under the table. Aunt Mabel squinted at Kyle. "Heard some rumors at church, Kyle. Marge Donovan said she saw suits from that Big Ham outfit touring your property last month." The table went quiet. Kyle laughed too loudly. "Just consultants, Aunt Mabel, getting some advice on modern practices." Judith looked at me. "Frank, you okay with outside consultants?
Dad always said corporate farming would be the death of places like ours. Before I could answer, Kyle jumped in. Times change, Aunt Judith. What worked for Grandpa won't work today. Scale is everything now. Is that why you laid off the Morales family last month? I asked quietly. Carlos worked that land with me for 20 years. Kyle's smile faltered. Business decision, Uncle Frank. Their jobs were redundant with the new systems. Redundant, I repeated, like traditional family farming? Meredith jumped in, clearly sensing tension. Who's ready for cake? And Frank needs to open his presents. As Ellen served cake, Kyle kept glancing at his phone. I noticed he'd stepped away twice to take calls, returning with forced smiles. The tension in the room was thicker than winter molasses. When it came time for presents, I opened them slowly. Fishing lures from Judith, a hand-knitted sweater from Aunt Mabel, a gift card to Cracker Barrel from the cousins. Finally, Kyle's small box. Inside was a silver money clip with my initials. For all that retirement money you'll be enjoying, he said with a wink. I held it up. Nice. Looks expensive. Only the best for you, Uncle Frank. I nodded, then stood up slowly. I have an announcement to make. Since we're all here together, there's something you should all know. Ellen reached for my hand, giving it a squeeze of support.
3 days ago, I said, my voice steady, I received a call from Roger Buchanan at Big Ham Industries confirming the closing date for the sale of Simpson Family Farms. Kyle's face drained of color. The funny thing is, I continued, I wasn't aware the farm was for sale. The room went silent. You could have heard a mouse sneeze. What are you talking about, Frank? Judith asked, looking between Kyle and me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. This is a copy of a sales agreement between Kyle Simpson and Big Ham Industries for the purchase of Simpson Family Farms for $3.2 million. I placed it on the table. Signed last month, closing next week. Kyle stood up so fast his chair fell backward. That's private business documentation. Where did you get that? Roger Buchanan and I go way back, played high school football together. When he realized I wasn't involved in the negotiations, he got concerned. I looked Kyle straight in the eyes. 3 generations of Simpsons built that farm. My father refused to sell to Big Ham. I refused to sell to Big Ham. But you couldn't wait to cash out, could you? Uncle Frank, Kyle's voice had an edge I'd never heard before. You signed the farm over to me. It's mine to do with as I see fit. Legally, yes, I admitted, but you promised to continue the family legacy. You said you wanted to take care of Ellen and me. And I will, Kyle insisted, looking around at the family for support. The stipend I've arranged is generous. You'll be comfortable. Aunt Mabel snorted. What's the stipend, Kyle? 10%? 5? Kyle's silence was answer enough. $100,000, I said quietly. That's what my life's work is worth to my nephew. 3% of the sale price. Meredith stood up beside Kyle. That's a perfectly reasonable arrangement. You're not even working the farm anymore. Ellen, who rarely raised her voice, spoke up. We moved because Kyle said he needed the farmhouse for his family. He said they were outgrowing their house in town. Then they kept that house and built a mansion instead. Business decisions, Kyle muttered. The farm needs modernization to stay competitive. Big Ham has the capital to make that happen. Big Ham will tear down the original barn, I said, the one my grandfather built by hand in 1923. They'll raise the orchard where your father played as a boy. They'll turn it into an industrial operation with minimum wage workers and automated feeding systems. That's progress, Kyle shot back, growing bolder. I'm sorry if you can't see that, but farming isn't about sentimentality anymore. It's about efficiency and profit margins. I nodded slowly, then reached into my other pocket. You know what else isn't about sentimentality? Legal contracts. The room went quiet again as I pulled out another document. "What's that?" Kyle asked, a hint of worry in his voice. "When I signed the farm over to you, there was a clause on page 17, paragraph 3. It stated that if the property was sold within 5 years of transfer, the original owner would retain right of first refusal and 50% of any proceeds from the sale." I smiled thinly. My lawyer insisted on it, just in case. Kyle's face went from white to red. That's not, you can't." "I already spoke to Roger," I continued calmly. "Big Ham is willing to honor the contract either way, but they need to know by tomorrow whether they're dealing with you or with me." Judith started laughing. "Oh my God, Frank, you sly old fox." Kyle grabbed the document from my hand, scanning it frantically. When he found the clause, his hands began to shake. "You tricked me?" "No, son. I protected myself. There's a difference." I stood up straight, feeling taller than I had in years. "Here's what's going to happen. The sale will proceed. Big Ham gets the farm either way. I'm too old to fight corporate agriculture. But Ellen and I will receive $1.6 million. "That's my money!" Kyle shouted. "I did all the work modernizing that operation. With my equipment, my breeding stock, my reputation that got you those contracts." I wasn't yelling, but my voice carried the weight of decades of hard work. "You have a choice. Accept these terms, or I'll exercise my right of first refusal, buy back the farm, and sell it myself. Either way, Ellen and I get our fair share." Kyle threw the document down. "This is bullshit. I'm calling my lawyer." "Go ahead," I said. "But Big Ham won't wait. They have 3 other farms lined up if this one falls through." The truth of his situation dawned on Kyle's face. He was trapped. Meredith tugged at his arm. "Kyle, let's go. This isn't the place to discuss business." As they gathered their children and headed for the door, Kyle turned back. His face was a storm of anger and embarrassment. "You won't get away with this. You've ruined everything." I walked to the door as they stormed out. "Kyle," I called after him. He stopped but didn't turn around. The farm was never just about money. That was the one thing I couldn't teach you. After the screen door slammed, I turned back to face my family. Their expressions ranged from shock to admiration. "Frank Simpson," Aunt Mabel said, raising her iced tea like a toast. "You may look like your daddy, but you've got your mama's spine of steel." The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m., farmer's hours. It was Roger from Big Ham. "Frank, we've got a situation. Kyle's lawyer is claiming coercion on the contract clause. Says you tricked him into signing without proper legal review." I sighed. "Roger, he had the same access to lawyers that I did. He just didn't bother reading what he signed." "I know that, Frank, but this could tie things up for months. Big Ham's board wants clean acquisitions, not family drama." I gazed out the window toward where my farm used to be visible from our old house. "Make him an offer he can't refuse, Roger. I just want this over with." By noon, the deal was restructured. Kyle would get $2 million. Ellen and I would get $1.2 million. Big Ham would pay an additional $500,000 to expedite the closing without legal challenges. Everyone would get less than they wanted, but more than they deserved. The fallout within the family was immediate and messy. Judith called to tell me Kyle was bad-mouthing me at the diner, claiming I'd lost my mind in my old age. The cousins from Missouri were divided. Half thought I'd been too harsh. Half thought Kyle had it coming. Aunt Mabel, bless her, sent a pie with a note that read simply, "Earl would be proud." 3 days after my birthday, Ellen found me sitting in the garage, staring at old farm equipment I'd kept when we moved.
Dad's first hammer, the hand-carved pig board we used for tracking breeding lines before computers, a jar of soil from the north field where we scattered Thomas's ashes. "Frank," she said gently, "Carlos Morales is here to see you." Carlos had worked our farm for 20 years before Kyle laid him off. His eldest son had learned to drive a tractor on our back 40. His daughter had married her husband in our apple orchard. He stood awkwardly in our living room, hat in hand. "Mr. Frank, I heard what happened with the farm." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "My brother Eduardo, he has 40 acres near Mason City. Good land. He's getting too old to work it himself, wants to sell." I shook my head. "I'm too old to start over, Carlos." "Not to farm," Carlos said quickly, "for the pigs, the heritage breeds you kept, the Gloucester Old Spots and those red wattles. Bigham, they won't keep those. They only want the commercial whites." Something stirred in my chest. Those heritage breeds had been my passion project. Dad had started our line of Old Spots back in the 60s. They were living history, representing pig husbandry before industrial farming took over. Eduardo is asking $400,000 for the land. It has a small house, good well water. Carlos looked at me hopefully. "My sons and I, we could work it. Keep the Simpson bloodlines going. You could advise. Be the, how you say, the patriarch." Ellen's hand found mine. "Frank, you've been miserable since we moved to town." 2 weeks later, we closed on Eduardo's property. We put $400,000 into the land, $300,000 into new facilities specifically designed for heritage breed conservation, and kept the rest for living expenses. I legally established the Simpson Heritage Pig Conservation Trust, with Carlos's oldest son Miguel as the operations manager and myself as chairman. The day after Bigham took possession of the old farm, I drove out there one last time. The corporate flags were already flying. Men in hard hats were assessing the old barns. I spotted Kyle's truck parked near the main office. I didn't stop. Instead, I drove to our new property 20 miles away. Carlos and his sons had already moved 15 of my best breeding sows and 2 boars, animals I'd quietly transported to a neighbor's farm days before the sale closed. Kyle never even noticed they were missing from the inventory. The new place wasn't much to look at yet. Just 40 acres of decent pasture, a weathered farmhouse, and a barn that needed work. But when I stepped out of my truck, the familiar grunt of my old spots greeted me. These weren't just pigs.
They were living connections to my father, my grandfather, to the history of family farming in America. Carlos approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Frank, the Northfield needs lime before winter, and we should order heritage feed before prices go up." Just like that, I was back in the rhythm of farm life. Not running a commercial operation, but preserving something more valuable. A month after we started the conservation program, agricultural students from Iowa State began arriving for internships. A feature in Modern Farmer magazine brought visitors from as far as California. The Livestock Conservancy offered grant money to expand our breeding program. Then came the unexpected twist. I was in the barn one afternoon when Ellen called me to the house. Kyle was sitting in our modest living room, looking uncomfortable. "Uncle Frank," he began, not meeting my eyes, "I sold the farm." "I know, son, 2 months ago." "No," he said, finally looking up. "I mean, Bigham just laid me off. They kept me on as regional manager for exactly 60 days, long enough for the sale to clear all legal hurdles. Then they brought in their own team from corporate." I said nothing. "They're tearing down the old house next week," he continued, his voice hollow. "Meredith and I bought a place in Des Moines. I've got a job interview with an agricultural supply company." Part of me wanted to say "I told you so," but the defeated look on his face, it reminded me too much of his father after the bad investments of '79. Of myself, sitting in Earl Simpson's office, being told I wasn't smart enough for college. "What do you want, Kyle?" He swallowed hard.
I heard about what you're doing here, the heritage breeds, the conservation program. He hesitated. I know I don't deserve it, but is there a place for me in it? Ellen's hand touched my shoulder. I covered it with my own. Not yet, I said finally, but come back in 6 months. If you've learned something by then, we'll talk. Kyle nodded, understanding the opportunity for what it was. Not forgiveness, but a chance to earn it. After he left, Ellen and I walked out to the new pig pens. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across land that wasn't as rich as our old farm, but was ours, in a way the other never would be again. Do you think he'll come back? Ellen asked. I watched a sow nudge her piglets toward the feeding trough, teaching them, as pigs have done for generations. I hope so, I said. Family's complicated, but it's all we've got. So here I am, sitting on the porch of our modest farmhouse, watching the sun set over 40 acres that will never make me rich, but give me purpose every morning when I wake up. That plastic piggy bank Kyle gave me for my birthday, I keep it on my desk as a reminder that some things are worth more than money. Last week, Kyle started working Saturdays with Carlos's sons. He doesn't say much, just listens and learns. It's a start. The Simpson Heritage Pig Conservation Program now hosts school groups every month. Children who've never seen a real pig get to meet animals with 300 years of history in their bloodlines. Sometimes I see my father in their curious eyes, my brother in their cautious first steps toward the pen. I lost a $3 million farm and found something I couldn't put a price tag on. Legacy that can't be sold, only shared. If there's one thing I've learned in my 68 years, it's that family land isn't just about the soil. It's about the stories that grow from it. And sometimes, when everything seems lost, you find a new way to keep those stories alive. If you've got family drama or inheritance stories of your own, drop them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed hearing about my journey from betrayal to rebuilding, hit that subscribe button for more real-life stories of resilience and renewal. Thanks for listening to this old pig farmer's tale. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting wiser.